So it's the middle of the 1800s, and there's this one guy, he goes by the name of Big Nose George. This is the story of George Parrott. Now, George was a cattle rustler, a highwayman, and a killer. Sounds like a pretty typical Tuesday for someone in the 1800s. But George's story doesn't just end with a bullet or a noose. Oh no. That's precisely when things go from Wild West to... Wait, what? So who was this guy? George Parrott, or perhaps his name was George Manus or George Warden, we're not really sure, because outlaws collected aliases like trading cards. Anyway, he was apparently born in Montbéliard, France, around 1834. How exactly he journeyed from France to the rugged and untamed Wyoming territory is lost to the duty of history. Pretty typical for these frontier drifters looking to maybe lose their past or find some fortune. The wide open spaces offered a chance to reinvent oneself, or at least obscure where you came from, which is again a common theme for people who pushed west. Now, by the late 1870s, George wasn't exactly winning any citizenship awards. He'd fallen in with a rough crowd, rustling cattle, holding up travelers, your basic Wild West starter pack of crime. His gang was a colorful bunch, including characters like Dutch Charlie Burris, or Bates, or Burress. Again, we don't really know. Seriously, just pick a name, guys. And a fellow named Frank McKinney, who, get this, sometimes allegedly claimed he was the Frank James. I don't really know, just adding more confusion. Frank Toll, and a guy named Sim Wan, or Jan, who George later insisted was the real gang leader. Now, this constant shifting of names wasn't just about dodging the law, it reflected the chaotic, often anonymous nature of life on the edge of civilization. They were known nuisances, maybe even using the infamous hole-in-the-wall country as a hideout sometimes, but soon they'd graduate from petty theft to something that would seal their fates. Now, it's August 1878. Big Nose George and his crew decide to think bigger. Forget lonely travelers, they're going for Iron Horse, the Union Pacific Railroad. Their target? Train number 3, westbound, likely carrying a hefty payroll. Now, the plan seems simple enough. Find a nice isolated stretch of track near Medicine Bow, Wyoming, maybe up on a high embankment where escape would be tricky for passengers. Loosen a rail, derail the train in the middle of nowhere, and help themselves to the cash. What could go wrong? They picked their spot, maybe near Como Lake, got to work prying at the spikes, but this is where their criminal genius hit a snag. A Union Pacific section crew just wrapping up their workday literally stumbled onto the sabotage. The foreman, sharp fellow, noticed the damage, but played it cool. He didn't panic, just calmly walked back, got his tools, signaled the incoming train to stop, and had his crew fix the track before the gang could react. And apparently there was a big moment of debate among the outlaws. Frank McKinney reportedly wanted to just shoot the workers and get on with it, but Big Nose George and Frank Toll argued against it, saying they weren't there to kill section hands. Now, the gang could only watch in frustration as their big payday literally rolled away down the tracks. Robbery averted. But their troubles were just getting started. Word got out fast. A posse saddled up, 2 men took the lead, Carbon County Deputy Sheriff Robert Widowfield, some sources say he was actually deputized just that day for this specific case, and Union Pacific Railroad Detective Tip Vincent. They were experienced men tracking the gang towards Elk Mountain, deep into a treacherous spot called Rattlesnake Canyon. But the outlaws were not caught flat-footed. They'd posted an outlook who spotted the lawmen coming. In a flash, they stamped out their campfire, grabbed their guns, and melted into the brush, setting a deadly trap. As Deputy Widowfield rode into the seemingly deserted campsite, he noticed the campfire ashes were still warm. He probably thought, "These guys must be close," and maybe calling out to his partner, although this would be his last thought. A shot exploded from the ambush, hitting Widowfield square in the face. He was killed instantly. Detective Vincent reacted fast, wheeling his horse, trying to gallop back up to the canyon to safety. More shots erupted. One account claims it was Big Nose George himself who fired the shot that knocked Vincent from his saddle. Vincent struggled to his knees, trying to return fire, but the outlaws riddled him with bullets. This wasn't just a shootout. It was a cold-blooded murder, an ambush. And the gang wasn't done. They looted the bodies, taking weapons, gear, even one of the horses. Then, trying to cover their tracks, they dragged the slain lawmen into a dry creek bed and threw some brush and gravel over them. Then, they vanished into the wilderness. It took days for a search party to find the bodies, already decomposing in the August heat. The brutal murder sent shockwaves through the Wyoming territory. Killing lawmen wasn't just a crime, it was an attack on the fragile structure of order people were trying to build. And the response was immediate. A $10,000 reward was offered, which in today's money would be like $200,000, which quickly doubled to a massive $20,000 reward by the Union Pacific Railroad. That's nearly $500,000 in today's money. Now that kind of money could make a man rich overnight. Big Nose George and his pals weren't just small-time nuisances anymore. They were marked men, wanted dead or alive for murder. George and his partner in crime, Dutch Charlie, knew Wyoming was too hot for them. They hightailed it north into Montana territory. They might have restocked by robbing Trabing Station on Crazy Woman Creek, taking supplies and, reportedly, 2 barrels of whiskey at gunpoint. They needed to lay low, maybe trapping furs, maybe running to Canada on horseback. But George didn't exactly keep a low profile. In February 1879, near Miles City, Montana, he took part in another incredibly bold robbery. A local merchant named Morris Kahn was traveling east with a large sum of money to buy merchandise. Thought he was safe, traveling with a military convoy. 15 soldiers, officers, the works. But in a steep ravine, later known as Kahn's Coulee, George, Charlie, and a couple of others ambushed the entire strung-out convoy, capturing soldiers, officers, and Kahn himself, robbing him of thousands of dollars right under the army's nose. Audacious doesn't even begin to cover it. But Big Nose George possessed a character flaw perhaps even more dangerous than his criminal tendencies: a big mouth, especially when fueled by whiskey. Fast forward to 1880, back in Miles City, George and Dutch Charlie are deep in their cups, feeling bold or maybe just stupid. George starts bragging loudly about the botched Wyoming train job, about killing those 2 lawmen. Maybe he spilled the beans to a saloon dancer, maybe just to the guy next to him at the bar. Terrible idea. In a frontier town saloon, secrets don't stay secret long, especially when there's a $20,000 reward attached. Word spread like tumbleweeds in a windstorm. Someone connected George's drunken boasts back to the murders in Wyoming, and soon local deputies Lem Wilson and Fred Schmalz heard the talk. They tracked George down, possibly finding him still in the saloon, and placed him under arrest. Some accounts say he went quietly, maybe too hungover or surprised to resist. Dutch Charlie was rounded up too. Big Nose George's own loose lips had finally caught up with him. The Montana vacation was over. It was time to go back to Wyoming and face the music. The folks in Carbon, Wyoming, a coal mining town where Deputy Widowfield was known and respected, were particularly incensed. They might have even suspected the gang had designs on their mine payroll. Dutch Charlie learned about Carbon's anger the hard way. As the train carrying him and George passed through the town, it was stopped by a determined lynch mob. They dragged Charlie off the train. No trial, no judge, no jury. Just a rope tossed over the crossbeam of a telegraph pole, a barrel kicked out from under him, and that was the end of Dutch Charlie. One particularly grim legend even claims it was Widowfield's vengeful sister-in-law who delivered the final kick. But they weren't done. The same mob, or one just like it, hauled George out to that same telegraph pole. Up he went. But George, facing imminent death, started talking, and talking fast. He confessed, right there, dangling from a rope. He spilled his guts, promised to tell them everything he knew about the murders, name his accomplices if they'd just cut him down and let him face a proper trial. And incredibly, this worked. Maybe the mob figured a confession and a guaranteed legal hanging was better justice. Maybe they just wanted the full story. But whatever the reason, they lowered Big Nose George, still breathing, and returned him to Sheriff Rankin's custody. Now, back in the relative safety of Rawlins Jail, the wheels of formal justice started turning. Big Nose George was arraigned on September 13th, 1880. What followed was a legal dance. He pled guilty, then not guilty, maybe tried for a change of venue, claiming the judge was biased, then finally pled guilty again. Good Lord. On December 15th, the sentence came down. Guilty of murder, punished to death by hanging, scheduled for April 2nd, 1881. While waiting for his date with the hangman, George reportedly put on a show of piety. Maybe he found religion or tried to lure the guards into a false sense of security. Who knows? But behind the scenes, he was busy. Using a small hidden pocket knife, he painstakingly worked on the heavy iron rivets of his leg shackles. And just 10 days before he was set to hang, George made his desperate move. He managed to free himself from the shackles. He lay in wait, perhaps hiding in the washroom or water closet. And when jailer Robert Rankin entered the cell block area, George sprang the trap, attacking him from behind. He swung the heavy iron shackles, 7 or 8 pounds of metal, and brought them down hard on Rankin's head, fracturing his skull. It was a brutal attack on Rankin, and though severely injured, didn't go down without a fight. He managed to grapple with George, maybe landing a blow that stunned the outlaw, and crucially, he cried out for help. His wife, Rosa Rankin, heard the struggle, and without hesitation, she grabbed her husband's pistol, rushing back into the cell block, pistol aimed steady. She confronted the desperate outlaw and forced him back into his cell, and she single-handedly stopped a murderer's escape. But the damage was done. News of the breakout attempt and the attack on Rankin had already reached the town, and they have had enough. That very night, March 22nd, 1881, the fury in Rawlins reached its peak, and so a mob gathered, about 200 people, many masked, all bent on immediate final justice. They stormed the jail, overpowered the guards, seized Big Nose George, tied his hands behind his back, and dragged him out into the night. They marched him down Front Street to that sturdy telegraph pole near the railroad tracks. And this wasn't just an execution, it felt like a ritual. They stood him up on an empty kerosene bale. The rope went over the crossarm, and the noose cinched tight. But then, bam! The rope broke. George tumbled to the ground, maybe his feet even touched, saving him for a second. Terrified, he pleaded with the crowd, "Shoot me! For God's sake, shoot me!" But the mob denied him even that mercy. They were determined he would hang. They fetched a new, heavier rope. This time they brought a ladder and leaned it against the telegraph pole. They forced George to climb up. Wearing his heavy leg irons, this was kind of difficult, and in the chaos, either during the fall or the climb, he managed to work his hands loose. Then the mob yanked the ladder away. George swung towards the pole. Instinct took over. With his hands free, he threw his arms and legs around the wood, desperately trying to hold on, to keep the rope from tightening, to breathe. He clung there, gasping, fighting for life, but gravity, exhaustion, and the crushing weight of his shackles were relentless. Big Nose George's strength failed. He slid down the pole. The noose did its work, and he was now dead. And after Big Nose George's gruesome lynching, frontier science took kind of a dark turn. Local doctors briefly studied his brain and face, and they even tanned his skin into a pair of shoes. What the fuck? Pieces of his skull passed through curious hands for decades. Today, the only reminders are the macabre artifacts, those infamous shoes and skull fragments quietly housed in a Wyoming museum. And Big Nose George didn't become the stuff of legends by dying quietly in his grave. He lives on in those unsettling relics, a final testament to the Wild West capacity for both violence and morbid curiosity.